Christ is risen. Welcome to Spiritual Calisthenics. Today, on May 16th, we commemorate the memory of St. Theodore the Sanctified. This saint was born in Upper Thebaid of the Christian parents and joined the community of St. Pachomius at the age of 14. He became the greatest of his disciples. Because of Theodore's utter humility and unquestioning obedience, Pachomius called him more and more to his aid in governing the monasteries he had established. Although some found fault with this, because Theodore was younger than they, Pachomius continued to put his confidence in him, to such a degree that once he told the brotherhood, "Theodore and I fulfill the same service for God, and he also has the authority to give commands as father." Pachomius was succeeded as governor of the monks by St. Orthias in 346, and Orthias later took Theodore as his fellow abbot. At Theodore's death in the year 368, the monks mourned him so bitterly that the sound of their crying was heard on the other side of the river. "You did prove to be a citizen of the desert by an angel, as an angel bearing flesh, and a wonder-worker, O Theodore, our God-fearing father. By fasting, vigil, and prayer you did obtain heavenly gifts, and you heal the sick and the souls of them that have recourse to you by faith. Glory to him that gives you strength. Glory to him that has crowned you. Glory to him that works healings for all through you." Continuing with the Acts of the Apostles. In those days, at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, giving alms liberally to all the people, and prayed constantly to God. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, "Cornelius." And he stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" He said to him, "Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa, and bring one Simon, who is called Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside." So this is the great bringing in of the Gentiles. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him, and having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. The next day, as they were on their journey and coming near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray, about the 6th hour. And he became hungry and desired something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance, and saw the heaven open, and something descending like a great sheet, let down by 4 corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals, and reptiles, and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "No, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." This because, as we have to understand from the Old Testament books, that the dietary restrictions of the Jews were very, very strict, and they were considered unclean. And so these things that Peter is being asked to eat would have been considered unclean. Now, this is, of course, is a double entendre, because what we're actually getting to is the idea that the Gentiles are not unclean. And the voice came to him again a second time. "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. Now, this is again an analogy that the things that were in there, the things that were considered common to the Jewish people, is now going to be considered sacred. The idea that the Gentiles are not common, they are not other, they are not dehumanized, they are one of us. Continuing with the Gospel of John. The Lord said to the Jews who had believed in him, "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him." Now this is important. Abides, to remain, many. "As the living Father sent me," again, alive, the living Father, "and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me will live because of me." We see this continuing, this verbiage of living. "This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as the fathers who ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever." This he said in the synagogue as he taught at Capernaum. Now this is very significant, because the city of Capernaum does not exist anymore. It no longer lives. In other words, and it was one of the major cities at that time. So they all thought at the time, this city will remain. But Jesus Christ is preaching here specifically to show us he remains forever. His word remains forever. His life remains forever in us. Many of his disciples, when they heard it, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it?" But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples murmured at it, said to them, Do you take offense at this? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is of no avail. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you that do not believe. For Jesus knew from the first who those were that did not believe, and who it was that would betray him. He said, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by him the Father." In other words, to understand this, to understand the body and blood of Christ, the Eucharistic assembly is impossible outside of faith, which is given to us by God the Father. After this, many of his disciples drew back and no longer went about with him. Now, there is a tradition, because that verse, after this, many of his disciples drew back and no longer went about with him, is chapter 6, verse 66. And so people look at 666, the idea of those that no longer walk with Jesus Christ because they do not believe in eating the body and blood of Christ is salvation. Obviously, the numerology of the Bible was not written in such a way to be so specific to say, aha, this is the mark of the beast. No. However, this is very, very important, because even today we see within some Christian denominations this idea of almost a dismissal of the Eucharistic assembly, or seeing it as just a memorial or just as a symbolic practice of our communion with God, when Jesus Christ is being very literal, very specific. And when he institutes this at the mystical supper, it is very, very real. This is how we are to be. Now, I skipped it on Sunday, but it is very, very important that we understand, and I will come back to it on another time. But the Eothenon gospel, in which Jesus Christ appears to Luke and Cleopas on the road to Emmaus, he is only understood by them in the Eucharist. In other words, we see the disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus Christ comes with them, but they don't recognize him. And they're his disciples. They should recognize him, but they don't. And so Jesus Christ proceeds to have a Bible study. Again, I will go into more detail at a later point. But they still don't recognize him. It is only when he breaks the bread, symbolizing the Eucharistic assembly, that their eyes are opened and they recognize who he is. In other words, it is through communion, it is through the Eucharist that we are able to experience and remain with God, to abide in God. This is what it means to have the flowing life of God inside of us. And that is only possible through communion. This is why frequent communion is stressed so much in the early church and has made a resurgence for the last 100 years, that it is important for us to take communion. It is important for us to have that communion with God, that he remain in us. Jesus said to the 12, "Do you also wish to go away?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are Christ, the Son of the living God." So St. Peter's declaration is our declaration, that we understand that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. We can't find that anywhere else. We will not find the way, the truth, and the life anywhere outside of Christ. And only through partaking of the mystical reality of the body and blood of Christ can we truly experience that. If this was just a one-off analogy, Jesus Christ would not have said this so many times. The bread, the wine, the body, the blood, this is life. I hope that you've enjoyed today's spiritual calisthenics. Have a blessed and wonderful day. Christos Anesti.